is going to be able to be heard clearer for everybody else who's participating via Zoom. You might,
If I do what?
I would just, if you want, do Zoom,
Yeah.
and then you'll be able to talk through your mic, which will be here.
Right.
But folks in Zoom aren't going to really be able to hear you unless they're picking up the mic. So
Right.
you'll be doing both. We'll have you here, and you also show up on the Zoom screen.
Now, are we not seeing faces on this one?
You will, yeah, if you do Zoom. I mean, there's several.
I'm in right
now.
now.
My face, nobody's face is showing up.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
you
me
want
either.
to show up on their monitors.
We're on the air.
We're on the air, sir.
John, we're on the air.
No, thank you.
Oh, but I don't have. Some sort of setting. See anything. I guess they can hear me.
Send it to
Yeah, sure.
No, check that out.
Send me in there.
Hey, you're on there. See, you're there.
I think it's when people talk that they don't talk. Oh, and yeah, now you got the.
See, but it's always just our names and not our.
Because they haven't gone to probably to share.
What do I need to do to start that?
Okay, share.
Video?
Our video. Okay.
And then you'll go to your
Where's me? You want to make sure everybody does that?
Sure I am, but my picture's not showing up.
They'll be able to hear me.
It'll be able to hear you if you're recording. Oh wait. Well, no, actually, you will
Unmute yourself if you want.
Oh, okay.
Just like you would go.
Here I am.
Okay. This proves that we can do this from anywhere but here also, I think. I'm okay, thank you. Much appreciated.
Maybe the burrito can hold my phone.
Hello. Oh, John, can you hear me?
Man. All right.
I got you. He's letting us know that we're on. So
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this special council meeting to order. I'm going to do something a little bit different tonight. I'm going to actually go through the agenda ahead of time. We have what I perceive to be a number of people watching from home. So I want to make sure that they understand what's in the queue in terms of subsequent topics. First of all, some housekeeping, if you will. Councilperson's off-site. Staff's going to have you on audio mute. However, we do have video and we can see you. So when you want to speak, please raise your hand and we'll recognize you. And that pretty much goes for the councilpersons that are here as well. We want to prevent those from talking over each other, which really gets exacerbated when you have a system like this. So everybody will get a chance to speak, I assure you of that. For any citizens watching tonight, we welcome public input and questions. Please email both to admin, ADMIN, @rollacity.org. And in the next couple of days, we'll respond one way or another using a particular format. Might be an email response, it might be a more general press release or something along those lines. But we do encourage public input and public questions. Missouri's sunshine laws are restrictive, and for good reason, in terms of how City Council conducts its business. The public must have the right to hear and see the discussions and actions taken with very few exceptions. In emergency situations, we intend to continue to give the public full access as much as possible. So for tonight's agenda, I'll start by giving a short State of the City type presentation, and it's just a short summary of our conference call today with some of the other entities in town. We'll follow that by City Administrator John Butts, who will present the city's coronavirus preparedness plan. And we hope that the council approves that tonight. This particular plan expanded our typical emergency response plans, which are more geared to natural disasters where equipment and supplies are critical. The current situation requires us to address the potential loss of public safety personnel that are needed to respond to emergencies. Our plan also addresses work and compensation issues for city staff. Following that, Lance Thurman will then present the next item on the agenda, which is a legal review of the powers that a city council and mayor can take in an emergency. It's imperative for all of us to know what we can do and what we can't do. Once we understand the legal authorities that we have, we will ask you to consider two ordinances. The first ordinance is a formal declaration of emergency. This will authorize the mayor and city administrator to take day-to-day actions as needed and between council meetings. The ordinance is also a firm commitment on the adoption and implementation of the CDC-issued guidelines. We intend to speak to these guidelines with more frequency, and you will soon see some signs around town that are illustrating those. We intend to work with business community to be sure that these are posted in each and every business. And we ask your approval on this so we can operate the city on a day-to-day basis. The second ordinance will present a potential shelter-in-place type action. As we have seen elsewhere, these ordinances make allowances for industry and businesses that are deemed essential. Essential may be in the eyes of the beholder. Following the presentation, we will make a recommendation based on the consensus of City Hall, County Commission, Phelps Health, and the County Health Director at this time. And I do stress at this time because we know conditions change. We recognize that these conditions will likely change, so we're actually requesting a first reading tonight. This will start the process. It'll shorten the time it'll take to implement it, and when necessary, allow for the public to comment on the details within the proposed ordinance. Next, I would like the public to know that over the past 2 or 3 weeks, personnel at City Hall have been working nearly full-time every day, including myself. We are gathering information and contingency planning. We are taking the issue seriously, and we're working in a methodical way as those conditions change. With a situation like we have, there is no absolute right or wrong answers. Only the best answer given the known facts at the time. Similarly, people will have differing opinions on such things as what should be done now versus what could be done later. None of us should be critical of differing opinions. That will not be constructive, and we know that everyone only wishes for the best possible outcomes. And lastly, I would like to go over the essence of the CDC guidelines. The program is called Do the 5. Hands, wash them often. Elbows, cough into your elbow when you have to. Face, do not touch it. Feet, stay more than 6 feet from anyone else. And feel. If you feel sick, stay home. This is an effective, common sense approach that will prevent the spread of the virus. It only takes personal responsibility and self-discipline by all of us. So with that opening statement, I'm going to proceed to the current state of the city. City administration is meeting daily to exchange information, assess needs, and make changes accordingly. We have semi-weekly conversations with the executive leadership of Phelps Health, County Health Director, and at least one county commissioner. The 4 entities feel that it is imperative that we act with consensus. Phelps Health, as of this morning, has reported the triage tent across from the ER initially saw nearly 100 patients per day. Currently, the number is closer to 30. Phelps Health has bed capacity slightly more than traditionally available this time of year due to the deference of elective surgeries and less than the usual number of seasonal illnesses. They have ventilators, masks, and other PPE and are acquiring more. Testing continues daily, and with each passing day, the capacity to test increases. There is currently no one in Phelps Health that has tested positive for the virus. The Phelps County Health Director has reported tests done by the state labs are reported to the County Health Director. Tests done by commercial labs currently only have to report the positive cases. I believe there are 2 positive cases in Phelps County, neither of which originated here. Local businesses are doing, in the director's words, not mine, a fantastic job following the CDC guidelines. The director physically inspects businesses to monitor compliance. When improvements or suggestions are needed, she meets with management or ownership and has been receiving good cooperation. A bit less with the big box stores that are not locally owned. City of Rolla. Emergency personnel like police and fire are being isolated as much as possible. For example, the firemen located at Station 2 by the Eugene Northern Center are not interacting with those in Station 1. If necessary, the crew will further be divided, with some spending more time in the Eugene Northern Center. Other City Hall employees are distributed to such places at the center, which are closed. Police officers and inspectors are operating from their vehicles whenever possible in order to keep a safe distance. Rolla police are not yet seeing an increase in crime, but unfortunately a slight uptick in calls for domestic violence. In both cases, if somebody sees something, say something. So with that, I am going to pass the meeting to John, who is going to go over the coronavirus preparedness plan.
Thank you, Mayor. We have been working on this plan, as you've seen, early drafts as early as 3 or 4 weeks ago. And this is a document really we're preparing more internally and want to share with our employees. And while they've seen drafts of it, we have not finalized that. We wanted to bring this to you all, possibly with your ratification tonight, and then we would sort of distribute this. Now, I'll tell you, we are updating this regularly. In fact, I updated it Friday night after I mailed this out to you. So I'm going to just touch on, kind of walk us through page by page and touch on a few highlights as we go through this. What you'll notice on the front page is always going to have an updated date, March 26th. That's what we sent out last Friday. I've got a March 27th version from some very minor changes as well. So page 3.2, under the purpose, as of March, some of these are just notes for general information. As of March 25th, 2020, there are no known cases of COVID-19 in Phelps County. At that time, we did have the one quarantine patient that moved into unincorporated Phelps County, originated from the Springfield, Greene County area. There's since been a second one coming out of Marys County that's tested at the hospital and back in Marys County, all under quarantine. The other thing I would add on quarantine, the health department, in addition to inspecting all of the businesses, have a list of anyone who's been deemed quarantined, whether that's a positive hit or in some cases they've done the drive-through and were sent home. In those cases, they are being called once, twice, 3 times a day to verify that they are complying with the quarantine. The health department reports we've had very good cooperation from anybody on that list. On page 3.3, under plan objectives, middle of the page, the departmental service continuity plans is what each department is doing internally. We're doing that by separating crews and work assignments. That's under section 2. On page 3.4, the directive for employees exposed or suspected of exposure. If symptoms begin at work, employees should notify their immediate supervisor and the potential exposure, and immediately go home. And then we'll just run through the process of what was the interaction? Is this something that deems the next level of quarantine or testing or physician visits, that kind of thing. But we're encouraging all of the employees who aren't feeling well to go home. I'll tell you one of the interesting numbers that are out there. We have 200 full-time or so employees. We've had 3 employees in the last week who are home with some ailment, virus, allergies, nobody with COVID that we're aware of. And so that shows that even in this kind of high-risk season, all of those illnesses seem to be down simply because we're all taking those precautions that are appropriate to be taking. So we're monitoring that, but to have 3 out of 200 employees needing to take a day, or in some cases, one case is 2 weeks, I think that's pretty remarkable. Under page 3.5, under the execution of the preparedness plan, we were looking for some activity, so the state of Missouri issues their pandemic declaration. The mayor tonight, we're asking for the mayor and the council to do our declaration for the pandemic. We're checking, again, things like employee absenteeism under item 5 that you'll see on page 3.5. On page 3.6, this gets into a little bit more of the critical things affecting the employees, and these are compensation-related issues. So in the middle of the page on 3.6, we're looking to maintain a consistent and reasonable work schedule, taking into effect all the conditions of the families of the employees and the well-being of the family. As conditions evolve, employees, both full and part-time, may be asked, some have been asked to take on additional duties or unrelated duties as we have this need to sort of move people around, and that's worked out pretty well. I'm sure you're all aware of now the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, FFCRA. We've incorporated those requirements into this document, and this would be one way of our informing employees of how that all works. Just below that, under the pandemic sick leave, this is what we are calling the 80 hours of leave established by the FFCRA. So one change that I made since I put this out, we were debating on end of last week that we would actually make this retro to the March 22nd payroll. After verifying that with the federal guidelines, we would have to roll out a second 80-hour window after April 1st. So my change, the most current date change, is this is taking effect on Wednesday, April 1st, as the federal law takes effect. That will provide any full-time employee up to 80 hours of pandemic sick leave. Under Section 4 there, so prior to April 1st, employees may use, those that are sick and home may use their accrued sick leave or other compensatory leaves for that time, and then after April 1, will be eligible for this 80 hours. I would mention that is both for full-time employees and it's part-time employees based on the average hours of work that they would have in a 2-week time period. The other thing that's critical of the FFCRA, and it is what they're calling the extended FMLA. We're very familiar with the Fair Family Medical Leave Act for serious medical conditions, but this is extended under the law that basically says if you're caring for your child who is home under the age of 18 because of a closure at school, then you have this extended FMLA. So you're not meeting the requirements of a serious medical condition. It's by the quarantining of your child that you now have to be home. The law now says that will be 12 weeks paid leave at 2/3 the salary. So that's what we're proposing. You can actually use the first 80 hours or 2 weeks as your pandemic sick leave provision, and then trigger 10 weeks of the 2/3 pay for the extended family medical leave. We have not seen that as a real issue, although lots of our employees do have children, but they've been able to either work it out with family members or the other spouses at home. So we haven't seen a lot of requests for stay-at-home moms and dads for that purpose, but we've developed a form that's in this packet that will allow people to do that. The other thing on the bottom of 3.7 under the vacation leave consideration, we are putting a cap or a limit on the employee's ability to take vacation. We're not banning anyone that has scheduled vacation, but we're trying to cap that. And so when we want everybody on all hands on deck because we are shifting crews to weekends and that kind of thing. And so we're asking the employees not to take vacation. We have employees who are going to lose their vacation hours as a result of that. They're going to exceed what would be their maximum accrual. The plan eliminates that cap for basically a 90-day period. And so that we're not going to punish them by losing vacation days, and then we'll defer that between June and September when they are be more, hopefully at that point, encouraged to be able to take and use that vacation. The other thing we're proposing, under our current personnel rules, we allow once a year for the city to buy back up to 25% of an employee's accrued vacation leave. I'm suggesting that we offer that buyback a second time. Traditionally, we were always willing, our personnel policy said a 50% buyback. We've dropped that to 25% for the last several years because of the economy. And so we're proposing a second buyback of 25% if somebody has, again, been asked not to use leaves that they otherwise would and would then forfeit some accrual of leave. Page 3.8 gets into the telecommuting, and we don't have a lot of telecommuting. We do have the ability to do that on an employee and department arrangement, but so many of our employees are interacting directly with the public, the environmental services, the public safety, the public works. We have a few employees at City Hall that have the ability to do distant work, but quite frankly, somebody's got to be answering the phone calls and things here just to keep that business going. And so because we have good spacing here, we haven't had to use telecommuting, but it can happen, and certainly if we see the sick leave usages or anything pandemic occurring, we would trigger another whole level of telecommuting opportunities. Page 3.9 is the flexible work schedule. Talked a little bit about it again. Again, we're just asking employees, and we're changing work schedules days that they work, hours that they work, in order to just cover things. Getting a little less work done that way, but we're spreading it out really over a 7-day operation to a large degree. The middle of page 3.9 is internal communications. Again, tracking all sick leave. We've seen very little sick leave in the last month. We're going to track the pandemic sick leave as those requests come in. We'll track the implementation of the extended family medical leave and those applications. And we're tracking all direct expenses associated with this. So as the federal government does get and state does get to be able to reimburse, although there is some question about the reimbursement of small community out there. Right now it's 500,000 population and above. So we've got some work to do with our state and federal legislators, but we're tracking all that in case we are eligible for reimbursement for all of the extra costs we are incurring, including the sick leave and the extended family medical leave. The last few pages, starting on page 310, is just a department by department review of what we're doing, what we've done, what we're positioned to do. If you remember this 2 or 3 weeks ago when you first saw the drafts, we had a whole lot more tentatives. Quite frankly, all those tentatives have been put into action. We have very few tentative plans. We have, quite frankly, done all of the shifts and staffing that we thought we might have to do. One comment on parks. This is really an issue that we'll ask you to take up when you're considering the second ordinance tonight, is what to do about playgrounds. We still have our playgrounds open. A lot of cities have closed their playgrounds. A lot of cities have closed things even like basketball courts. I don't know that that makes sense at the dog park or at the tennis courts, but any place where people are being asked or are gathering in a group, some cities, many cities, larger urban areas for the most part, but they're even moving out of state, are closing those kinds of facilities as well. Included in here under the page 312 is the city council communications issues, shifting entirely to remote council meetings at one opportunity as we go forward, utilizing S&T's communication system to communicate with those students that are left, and to consider the stay-at-home ordinance. And then there's other things that are sort of brewing out there, both in the community and statewide, that I think we're going to be hearing more and more about. Environmental services, the one thing I wanted to point out is right now we're still saying we'd like to stay with the April 4th special pickup. We debated that even as late as Friday to see whether that makes sense to do. That's stuff, items are going to be coming out of people's homes, going to the curb. You know how we have that annual rummaging of your front yard when you put stuff out there. But really, once the stuff gets outside and is exposed to the air, exposed to the humidity, the risks are a lot less. We'll use gloves. We're going to put all hands on deck that we can. Actually, Brady has asked for another 8 to 12 staff members from other departments to provide assistance because we think that could be a really busy event. So we're going to ask neighbors' cooperation to be reasonable with what you put out on the April 4th special pickup. The last thing I'd point out is on page 3.15 through 3.17 is the form we've drafted that will allow employees, one, to be informed of the new law, and so the employee rights page is the very last page to your document, and then the 3-page application that will lay out the request, and all of that has to be documented for not only approvals, but for any reimbursement under the tax credit. So with that, I'd like to answer any questions that you have on the preparedness plan. And we're not asking for a resolution or an ordinance to enact it. A motion would at least acknowledge that this is a document that we can continue to work off of and share with the employees.
Those remotely, any questions?
Can you guys hear me?
Yep, is that Ann?
Yeah, very good. Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I wasn't getting a response earlier. Yeah. I think the plan has been excellently written. It's a thorough plan that from prevention and precautions to salaries and compensation, and I would be very in favor of it, seeing it go through.
Thank you. If there's no other questions, is there a motion to approve the coronavirus preparedness plan for the city of Rolla?
I'll make a motion.
So moved.
Village, Carolyn, and John. We can do this by voice vote, right?
Yep.
Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye, or for those off-site, raise your hand.
Aye.
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 Monty? Can you-
Right.
Okay. You're keeping your hand away from your face. I get it.
Mr. Mayor, if I may make the suggestion, I think we absolutely can do it by voice vote. Given we have a number of folks that are appearing off-site, it'd be my recommendation that we would go ahead and do a roll call vote
Okay.
on all votes.
Millie, would you call the roll call vote, please?
Yes.
Monty?
Yes.
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 Thank you for that. Next item will be a legal review. Lance, would you want to come up here? You do it there.
It makes no difference to me, whatever your pleasure.
Nobody can see you sitting there.
All right. So, if you're looking in your packet, I prepared a memorandum that I hope will answer some questions for folks. Number one question that I've heard more often than not is, what authority does the city have to prevent the outbreak of contagious diseases? As a third-class city, we are almost entirely, if not completely, under Chapter 77 of the revised statutes. That's the third-class city. And Chapter 77, Section 530 and 560 kind of lays out in very broad strokes that a city council has the right to pass ordinances and regulations for the preservation of general health and prevention and abatement of contagious diseases. Also, 77-530 goes on and directly addresses the question of quarantines. Not only does a third-class city have the ability to do quarantines, that power actually extends 5 miles out into the county. As we talked about at the last regular city council meeting, that power is not just left with the city, it's also in the hands of the county as well. It does not say who has the highest authority in that regard. It does not characterize who would prioritize over each, but I don't think that will be an issue because it sounds very much like we are working in conjunction with. So I don't expect there to be any issues, but both have the ability to do it. I broke down in my memo a number of questions that I thought. Basically, I just said, what questions could people have? And I tried to come up with those just so if there was anything out there, we were hitting it. Condemnation of real property is available for response to abatement of contagious disease. It's not terribly dissimilar as a process from the way it has gone about. If you're trying to take property to do economic things, but it is specifically listed that you would be able to use condemnation to avoid the spread of disease. That includes Chapter 88 and the mechanism. Also, that could possibly tie into Chapter 523, if you will remember when we did our review of that. Excuse me one moment. Regulation and suppression or abatement of business and public services. Again, Chapter 77, 530, and 560 are fairly broad they don't limit your ability very much. So that is the backbone for the ability to do almost all of the things that we have talked about. And if you look in the proposed ordinance for discussion this evening, it would include the ability for the city to regulate, suppress, or abate factories, warehouses, slaughterhouses, to secure, regulate any business that could be detrimental or dangerous to public health. Again, those are pretty broad terms, but it does give the ability to close down businesses. So I think that covers kind of the idea of quarantine. There are a couple of what I would call outer edge ideas. Public works, we can actually use prisoners from the city to do any necessary work using Chapter 71-220, which states that the city can cause everyone sentenced or convicted for a violation of city ordinances for imprisonment, fine, or both to be put to public works or labor on public buildings. This can be done by the city's legislative body through ordinance for any purpose deemed necessary to the city. Also, calling on civilians to aid in enforcing the laws. The mayor has the ability to call on every male inhabitant of the city between the ages of 18 and 50 if necessary to help in enforcement of laws, which again includes any issues of quarantine. The last section, introduction of emergency ordinance, that actually came from Chapter 78. It does not apply to the city. That is a special commission type of government which does not apply to the city of Rolla. Just kind of thinking outside the box. Prevention and suppression of nuisances. I don't know how many different ways the spread of disease, this particular disease, again, I was trying to think of all possibilities outside the box. If there's something that would include using the Middle Ages, the plague came from fleas on rats. If there was something that we could discover that would lead us to believe that there was infestations of rats in certain buildings, obviously we could use Chapter 71, 780 to do that for that nuisance purpose. I don't know that that applies to coronavirus, but I don't know that we know enough necessarily at this point about coronavirus to say that we're completely educated on where and how it comes from. I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
Lance, I saw a letter or petition that was circulating, and it discussed using the power of the city to prevent evictions or to stall mortgages, things of that nature. Does the city have any authority whatsoever to do anything like that?
In answer to your question, with regard to mortgages, to suspend the payment of rent or mortgages, I would say not. The city doesn't have any way that I can see that requires a moratorium on payment of money by contract. However, I do think the city has the ability, again, using 77-530 in its most broad strokes, to put a moratorium on evictions. And also, people need to understand that regardless of whether or not there's a moratorium on payments, that money is going to eventually come due one way or another regardless. My understanding that student loan payments are going to be placed on pause for maybe 3 months. At the conclusion of that money is still going to be due. It'll probably just be added as 3 additional months on the end of their note. So rent, I would assume, even if the governor, who might have the authority to do that, would do that, I would expect it to be a similar situation. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Any other
May I
questions?
say something?
I think it was Ann.
Oh, Ann, yes, go ahead.
And yeah, I called a local real estate company and asked them just about that because I'd gotten an email also regarding inability to pay rent. What they said to do, you know, that probably wouldn't happen, but if somebody anticipates that kind of a problem, they should call the real estate company, the rental department of that real estate company, and let them know of their concerns. They could work out maybe a program for them. And they suggested the same thing with our utility company. If there's an incidence where you find you might have a hard time to make your concern known and establish a relationship.
I would
That's what I told them.
also add, because of Supreme Court rules, the ability to get into court at this point creates a reality that I don't know that you would be able to do the eviction process at this time, regardless, because the courts aren't open to the public for that purpose.
Thank you, Ann. Any other questions? If not, thank you, Lance, for that. Next
you.
item on the agenda is to consider an ordinance declaring an emergency and adoption of the CDC mitigation strategies. That declaration is a procedural event that will allow you and us to do various things go forward. John?
Thank you, Mayor. We have this in your packets as well, and let's see if I can pull this up. Folks at home might want to.
Just a quick comment. I had a text saying that some people were having trouble hearing a little feedback, maybe because some people with their phones aren't muted. And so the actual, I don't know if that's the feed over the Rolla channel 16, but anybody who's got a phone on, just maybe make sure it's muted if you're not talking.
Pulling up the wrong document. Okay, never mind. So we do have two ordinances for you tonight. The first one we do think is something that's really important. Really, if we'd had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, would have been an appropriate time to take this action. We've been operating under very much this guideline as the county has declared an emergency. But this is an ordinance that declares an emergency proclamation in Rolla, and it encourages the city's citizens to implement the mitigation strategies laid out by the CDC. It cites both the governor's declaration on March 13th, the Phelps County Commission's declaration on March 19th, and it hits a couple of key points by that declaration. So under Section 2 of that ordinance, by declaring said emergency, the City Council may conduct emergency public meetings. It also establishes some ability to do that, not just by teleconference or by live perhaps, but it could literally be by telephone, facsimile, internet, or any other voice opportunity, given a seriousness of the emergency situation. That's going to be something that might get worse and worse, and so I think our precautions would have to be even more expedited, and potentially that would require a quicker action. It does establish under Section 3 some powers for the mayor. Many of these, again, we have been exercising, the mayor has been exercising over the last several weeks. The ability to close offices, to suspend all meetings, to call special meetings, to waive administrative and budgeting requirements, authorize necessary actions to promote the health and suppress disease, and subsection F, to impose curfews and to close any businesses that pose an unnecessary health risk. So by the declaration of the ordinance, you're clearly delegating that authority to the mayor. You all, as council members, still have that authority, but you're also delegating that on the day-to-day to the mayor. Section 4 includes the city administrator as the personnel officer, quite frankly, to do the things that we've been talking about, implementing all reasonable means to ensure the safety of our employees and the timely delivery of our services. We also, under Section 5, adopt an Exhibit A or Exhibit 1. That's what's in your packet. It is the CDC guidelines. It's about a 6-page document. And I did notice that we didn't include the Exhibit 2. It's a 1-page primer. It's a second document that we would make available, where the CDC is what is used all over the country. We have a one-page primer that's what we would be pushing out locally as well. So then there's some additional references for site and additional resources. So we would certainly consider any feedback, discussion on this ordinance, and can amend as you see fit, and council consideration tonight.
I noticed these are both ordinances. Or were we considering the emergency ordinance?
to raise your hand.
And the mayor can convene it.
Go ahead.
Real quick, at home there, I see Monty and Christine. Can you guys hear me can you raise your hand if you can hear me? Okay, good. Oh, kind of, Christine. All right. So my question is about the emergency declaration and the stay-at-home ordinance in terms of they would normally need a first and second reading. Is that right?
Yeah.
Was the plan for the emergency order to have the first and second tonight?
Yes.
Okay.
Jody?
In section 1, it says the state of emergency would last for 90 days. Now, I have a feeling that the full 90 days would be needed, but if it was not needed, how would we vacate this ordinance if we could earlier than that?
I believe it's just a rescindance of the ordinance.
And it wouldn't be anything more difficult than doing another ordinance.
Okay.
Right. The county did, I want to say 2 weeks, I believe, and Thursday they're going to redo it?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have any idea how long they're going to do it for?
It was a suggestion of a claim from the hospital, we do additional 2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay. So they're going to go in 2-week increments. But it's reversible.
Okay. I think we'll probably need the 90 days, but just in case.
Maureen?
In section 3, about suspending meetings, are we talking about Parks Board,
Yeah.
things like that?
Yeah.
Does that include City Council?
No. No, because we'll have a provision, just like we're doing now, to have those. So with respect to city council, what I would envision is having more frequent meetings or a special meeting. I think that's more for advisory boards and things like that. P and Z. David?
What type of action would it take by mayor, administrator, or council to make a meeting happen if it was so deemed necessary?
I don't know the answer to that, if either one can call a special meeting.
Well, we thought that. I've not been able, maybe Lance has found something. I can't find anything in our ordinances or in the statutes as to how a council calls a special meeting. It gives that authority to the mayor to do that. Now, in an emergency, I suspect in an ordinance like that, the council could put a provision in here saying 2/3 of the council could request a special meeting. But, and Lance, unless you're able to find something else in the statutes, you need to look at that, but
I have been looking for it.
I thought it was there, but I have not been able to find it.
I have a recollection that it requires one more, basically a quorum. A quorum can call a meeting. I remember reading it. I just can't find where I read it from, and I don't know whether that's because it has been rescinded or whether or not I'm just not looking in the same location. A few years ago, 5-ish, I was involved with an impeachment of a mayor in another municipality close by, and my recollection was that if the mayor does not call a meeting, and I recall reading at that time that statute, that all it required was city council quorum, so basically one more than half. I can't find it. I thought I knew right where it was, but it wasn't there.
This would be for all third-class cities?
At that time, that was a fourth-class city. So I've poured over both chapter 77 and 79 looking for it. I just can't find it. I also can't find it in chapter 71, which covers all cities. I will keep looking. That one kind of fell to the back burner as this became more immediate need.
I think the practicality of it, David, is if the majority of the council want a meeting, we would find a way to have a meeting. Monty, Christine?
Good.
Carolyn?
And Ann, too.
obviously there's going to be some people that, a lot of these things, they make them upset. I really like that we're being proactive. We are not at that peak yet. It's going to happen. We've got a ways to go. So even though things are really pretty good, I think, in Rolla right now, look around. And I think this being proactive is the best thing we can do.
We're being very proactive with the planning and the sourcing of information. Depending on your side of the fence, you can debate whether or not we're taking certain actions fast enough or too slow. I think the course that we're following is as conditions change, we're prepared to change, we're prepared to react. As conditions change, we react, and we certainly want to do that in concert with the health director, Phelps Health, and the county commissions. We're not an island, which means it's a whole lot better and it's a whole lot more effective if we're operating everyone on the same page. If there's no more questions, can we have the first reading?
An ordinance declaring an emergency proclamation in the city of Rolla and encouraging the citizens of the city of Rolla to implement the mitigation strategies laid out by the Centers for Disease Control and the National Institute of Health.
Make a motion that we suspend the rules and have the second reading.
Second.
Motion made and second. We'll do this with roll call vote as well. Millie?
Allen? Yes.
Murphy,
Yes?
Boland,
Yes.
Schneider,
Yes.
Roder,
Yes.
Muse,
Yes.
Jordan,
Yes.
Eberly,
Yes.
Yes.
Proud, Schott,
Yes.
Ruder,
Yes.
11 A's.
Thank you. Second reading, please.
An ordinance declaring an emergency proclamation in the city of Rolla and encouraging the citizens of the city of Rolla to implement the mitigation strategies laid out by the Centers for Disease Control and the National Institute of Health.
Make a motion that ordinance pass.
Second?
There's a motion made and second. Roll call vote.
Muse,
Yes.
Schott,
Yes.
Ruder,
Yes?
Schneider,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
Murphy,
Yes?
Proud,
Yes.
Roder,
Yes.
Jordan,
Yes.
Eberly,
Yes.
Boland,
Yes.
11 A's.
Ordinance is approved. The next item is to review an ordinance declaring a stay-at-home ordinance. This is an example. It's one that's very typical. Essentially, it mimics what the city of Columbia passed last Monday. Monday, or was it this Monday? Mondays are rolling together. Might have been this
It's been a
Monday.
while.
But in any event, we want to review that in depth and at least have a first reading tonight. John?
Thank you, Mayor, and we are seeing more and more cities and counties do this, really following St. Louis, Kansas City, Columbia, and Springfield. And as the mayor said, we modeled ours off of Columbia. Columbia mirrored theirs off of St. Louis County, added a few more exceptions or essential businesses to their ordinance. And that's seeming to be carrying as we're seeing other communities consider this ordinance. So I think the key is the intent. Section 2 is the express intent to ensure the maximum number of people stay at home to slow the spread of COVID-19 while enabling essential services to continue. But the devil's in the details, and that's what this ordinance tries to get into. Section 3 is the stay-at-home provision. All individuals currently living in the city of Rolla would be ordered to stay at home or their place of residence except as allowable under this ordinance. And it goes on to give the exception or the essential activities, which includes essential governmental functions, and to operate essential businesses and those operations. Section 3.02 is non-essential businesses and operations must cease. So this is the declaration that this kind of an ordinance would do. Basically, all non-essential businesses and operations would be required to cease all activities except for the minimum basic operations. And some of this falls into the definitions that we'll touch on there. All essential businesses at the bottom of 3.02 are encouraged to remain open to the greatest extent feasible. Essential businesses and operations shall comply with social distancing. You'll hear that throughout the ordinance, whether you're gathering for a church service or a governmental function like this, it's still practicing all those safety issues that the mayor talked about early on. It does in 3.03 prohibits all public and private intentional gatherings of 10 or more. It does prohibit places of public amusement, whether indoors or outdoors, and this gets into everything from carnivals, amusement rides, we think bowling alleys, the movie theater, social clubs, all of that would be falling under that definition. There is an exception for outdoor parks and trails where no shared equipment is being utilized. So this ordinance would enact the playground ban, so to speak, along with other areas of gathering. And again, this is a draft and council is free to edit any and all of this. At the top of page 6.3, essential activities do not include weddings, funerals, wakes, memorial services, or similar gatherings as long as they do not exceed 10 persons. And that's some of the heartbreaking stories that we hear out there. That next provision, all public parks and open outdoor recreation areas are encouraged. Again, playgrounds would be closed. 3.404 is actually an interesting thing about this ordinance is that not only do you put that requirement on the businesses deemed essential or non-essential, but you're actually going to the citizen and giving them the order that they are not to leave home, but for the practice of essential businesses or the conduct of their day-to-day essential needs. 3.05 gives a provision for schools and social service agencies, allows them to operate for purposes of distribution of food and those kinds of things. Section 3.06 gets into exemptions for all 911 call center employees, fire personnel, law enforcement, public safety. A lot of those that would obviously be out in any kind of an exception. But the real challenge becomes the definitions in page 6.4, section 4. And it is there's two key definitions in there. One is under the definition under subsection E for essential activities, and then it goes on to, in section F, being the types of essential businesses. So I thought it would be worth really just quickly running down the list of essential businesses and then talk a little bit about what does that really mean in Rolla. So essential businesses, these would be businesses not only open but encouraged to be open to be providing services, would include a wide variety of healthcare operations, and under the definition of healthcare is veterinary services and related. Critical infrastructure, government functions, grocery stores, farmer markets, food pantries, any pet supply store, food cultivation, food production, including farming, any place that provides food, shelter, and social services, any media service, whether that's radio, news, or others, gas stations, auto supply, auto repair. We've had a few people ask us about dealerships. Dealerships all do maintenance, they all do rentals. Those are both accepted under most of these ordinances. I would say the vehicle is still an essential part of the practice, and the purchase of a vehicle would still be allowable, but it's just because the ordinance doesn't spell out that degree, but I think it would fall under that kind of classification, still practicing all of the good safe distance provisions. Banks and other financial transactions, so your Stiefels and Edward Jones would all be allowable to operate. Trash collection, hardware stores, which is a wide breadth, right? You're talking Dickie Bub's Family Center, Menards, Lowe's, trying to think of others that might fall under that kind of definition. Inns, hotels, motels would be allowed, although we're starting to see, at least in the urban areas, some of them closing voluntarily simply because the business demand is not there for all of them and they're sort of making a business decision. It exempts or accepts plumbers, electricians, and other exterminators, other household services, other services that are providing services for essential functions. Anybody in the construction services trade on active projects is allowed to continue to operate, as are mailing and shipping services. Educational institutions, interestingly enough, under this ordinance, are allowed to operate. It's just that most of them have chosen not to under their authorities. On page 6.6, private security services, laundromats, dry cleaners, funeral homes, mortuary services, churches practicing social distancing are all allowed to continue to practice. Storage for essential businesses, so storage facilities. Restaurants, as long as they provide either delivery, pickup, or carry out, are allowed to continue to operate. Anybody providing emergency repair and safety services. Supply products needed for people to work at home, that gets into a really gray area. So we think things like Staples falls under that. It may very well be that at first furniture factory outlet who provides chairs and desks and things that people would need to conduct at home. Electronic stores would fall under that. You can't buy video cameras right now. Laptops are hard to come by. All of those would be considered part of the essential operations. Anybody involved with transportation services, including vehicle rental sales and taxis, in fact, Ubers in Columbia are still considered a essential business. Home-based healthcare, defense and national security related issues, professional services, and this is a fairly wide definition that Columbia used. It's a little broader than what St. Louis used, and that included things like legal services, accounting services, insurance services, real estate services, any of those things that are being time-sensitive and emergency wills, all the things that are a part of an emergency response, those services are still being provided for. The next couple, labor unions, adoption agencies, those are probably less critical here. Operations identified by the University of Missouri system are all allowed to continue to operate, although they put their own extensive restrictions in. Adult detention facilities, child care providers, etc. There's another interesting exception in all of this, and it's called the minimum basic operations. And so for anybody else who's deemed non-essential, to the degree that they have to be open so that they can process their payroll, they can oversee the telecommuting services, that they can provide the benefits, they all have a right to still operate their business that just closed off to the public use, but there's still people conducting the core of their operations at that place of business. All of it requires the social, this is under subsection U, social distancing requirements, the 6-foot spacing, washing of hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, hand sanitizer, and regularly cleaning high-traffic surfaces. Even though we've closed down City Hall, we've moved into a twice-a-day cleaning, both first thing in the morning and in the early afternoon, just for the employees who are still having to conduct business. The key in these ordinances, and this is what's really interesting, is you're starting to see this issue really be debated amongst the cities and counties that are out there, and it's what to do with enforcement. There are ordinances that have been enacted that say stay at home and literally have exempted any enforcement mechanism. They haven't provided any penalty provision. However, when the city council adopts an ordinance, by its nature, it's a misdemeanor, and that is, correct me wrong, Lance, it's can be up to $500 and/or 90 days.
90 days in
jail.
jail.
Now, no city is doing that aggressively. St. Louis County's not, Springfield's not, but you're hearing stories of officers stopping people that are out randomly driving. They'll inquire, are you conducting a business? So they're looking at for opportunities to do it. And it does provide that mechanism if you've got a business who's just not cooperating, that you can go to the next level of warnings, education, and issuing citations. You can do the same thing to a person who is intentionally having parties at their home, and despite all of the efforts to prevent that, they can be found in violation of an ordinance such as that. So I think it's, those are the general classifications that I just come through my mind. Well, what's really allowed and what's not? And this is not all inclusive, but I just want to give some examples because we're hearing a lot about this, but these are a lot of businesses still deemed essential. So examples in Rolla of what's allowed: Walmart, Dollar Generals, gas in the convenience stores, Menards, Meeks, Lowe's, Academy Sports, PetSmart, restaurants with drive-through pickup, professional offices, engineering, contractors, Staples, hotels, CVS, Walgreens, sinks, auto shops, services, taxis, Uber, as I said. And then we also checked with all of our primary manufacturers, Royal Canin, Mosai, Brewer Science, and Hartman, all of whom said they have authorities, actually from some higher-ups, that they are all essential businesses and continue to practice. All of whom are taking advantage of telecommunicating where they can, and they're providing all the safe spacing requirements for those employees that do have to be there to keep their lines going. Hartman, for instance, just said, how quickly eggs are going off the shelf. Their order for the containers are up 30% as a result of this. So they're actually producing more and have to have their employees so that we can buy those eggs at Kroger and Aldi and Walmart and other stores. So some of the ones that are not allowed under this, many of whom have already closed on their own. So the clothing stores, right? We've seen JCPenney, we've seen Kohl's closed probably 2 weeks ago, TJ Maxx, Ross Dress closed, business decisions that they made. This would close a lot of the service industries, a lot of the smaller operations, the in-home kinds of things, salons and tattoos, barbers, as I mentioned, clothing stores, florists. I to me, would be a non-essential, although someone could argue for funerals and things like that, perhaps with a delivery program, but I don't see that exempted specifically in our ordinance. Health and fitness centers, as you know, we closed the center a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if the others, I know Planet Fitness closed, I don't know about Anytime Fitness, I don't know about This Vessels, so there may be some of those small, there's probably 3 or 4 others. They would be closed under this ordinance, they would otherwise be making the decision on their own. We also mentioned already the amusement types of businesses. We do know the bowling theater closed down for health and business reasons on their own, and the impact also to small mom and pop retail. So some of them on Pine Street, things that would have a little bit of sort of shopping opportunity, have mostly moved to an online presence, closing their doors and operating online. There's some gray area ones out there. I think the Hobby Lobby, which I heard was staying open. Now I think I heard this weekend they may not. Rolla Books and Toys, I believe, has closed, but that, you could make an argument. They're doing home improvements. They're doing arts, crafts, supplies, things for people at home. I don't know, our ordinance doesn't really exempt it. It doesn't really provide for it, but the company has been making that determination themselves. So that is a summary of the ordinance. Again, it is, we've got dozens of samples. We've kind of been pulled in what we think has become more of the common standard out there, and put that out for your consideration.
This past week, I've got a number of emails and phone calls, and I responded to each and every one of them. And what I really wanted to do was to talk to the person that was calling or writing in order to just get an assessment of what they think about these ordinances. More often than not, when you explain the nuances, they're not quite what people thought they were. They expected a whole lot of Rolla to be shut down. I think in the reality, the way these essential businesses are deemed, if you superimpose that on Rolla, there's not a heck of a lot more that would in fact be closed. I mean, at any Saturday I drove by Walmart and I was astounded that the parking lot was absolutely full. There was more people in that store at any one point in time than every other mom and pop in town. But the conversations that I had with folks centered on this, is this symbolic or is this substantive? And most seem to think it was symbolic, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes the symbolism, particularly associated with council taking an action like this, is in fact important. But if you're on the other side, symbolism is not enough. Go for more. And I think that's essentially the dilemma that we're going to face as a city. But we did want to get this in front of everybody. We did want to get it in front of the public today. So at least between today and what we think is down the road, there'll be time for contemplation, there'll be time for discussion, there'll be time for modifications, so on and so forth. So before I take questions, John, our recommendation along with the other 3 entities and the reasons behind it. Would you explain that?
Yeah, and I think the mayor referred to this earlier. It's sort of this idea of ramping up. And so as we were in conversations with Phelps Health and the health department, it's our recommendation at this point tonight, council can do different, not to declare an emergency, put this into effect, but to consider a first reading that puts it that much closer to at least further consideration and refinement. As you know, there's ordinances, there's a lot there. But the biggest reasons are, one, we're not seeing the activity, right? So it's a fine line. It's easy to say, well, we want to stop it before it happens. The concern we've got, and we're actually starting to hear this from cities that did enact this, some of the decision makers, if you get it out there too early, you sort of used one of your bullets of reinforcing this issue. And what's the next step? You know, calling out the National Guard to enforce the provisions. And so as we see things occurring in the community, we may perhaps want to use this as another round of reinforcement. The other thing, and Ashley made this point this morning, our health director, is she's gotten fantastic, and she used that word fantastic, cooperation from the businesses who are staying open and the way they're operating, both essential businesses and the non-essential. So for salons, for instance, I've been in touch with Alyssa a couple of times at Benton Square. Their business obviously is way down. They have tremendous inspection purposes that go into that facility. It's inspected regularly by the health department. And they feel that they are operating as safe as people going to someone's home to provide that same care. And that's what they're kind of the fear is. It will actually run some of this underground, and people will now be doing it in their homes or going to people's homes where there aren't sanitary issues, where there are not inspections and things like that. So, those are kind of the primary purposes. We have not seen much activity in Phelps County, thanks be to God, and we're actually seeing a drop in the drive-through. Now, we know that can change tomorrow. We do firmly believe that there are virus cases in Phelps County now. The fact that we don't have the positive tests here is not a sign of probably what's taken place. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. We're 2 weeks out from St. Pat's event, and what would have brought 2,000 people here that would have had them mingling in all kinds of venues. Now, we had some activities going, but it was nothing compared to that. So the thought is, again, prepare for some of these things, but if you jump it out there too soon, and the weather's turning nice and people are getting out there, they may end up just dismissing this entirely, which leaves us with only one action of a definitive enforcement provision that this is going to be difficult to do with any degree. So that was the summary of the conversations we had this morning and recommendation not to act tonight.
Thank you, John. Okay, questions. Let's start with those physically here. Carolyn.
You mentioned about driving, getting out and going for a ride. Are you saying that, and the reason I'm asking this is I've know several people that they're homebound and they are confined and they don't like it and they want to get out. They're going for rides. They're not stopping anywhere. They're just driving. I don't know how far. I know in one case it was all the way to Springfield and back just to drive.
Yeah, that's not
Is
where we're at
that
today.
not,
No, that's not where we're at today.
okay, will that become a problem for some reason?
Depends on how far enforcement may get. I mean, hell, this country may go to martial law, I don't know. But as of now, the answer to that is no. I'll read you it's section 304. Leaving home for essential activities is permitted. So now your question is,
Not
I'm
essential,
cooped
they
up,
just,
I want to get out there and I will get some fresh air. Technically speaking, that does not meet that.
that's why I asked.
So. Yeah, go to Walmart with 3,000
Sit in the
other
parking lot,
people.
take up a spot.
Jody?
So I know that the governor and the state folks have been meeting and talking about this also. I'm just wondering if you have any sense of what are the chances that the governor is going to do a statewide stay-at-home order in the immediate future?
There is at least once a week conference call that the governor's office and emergency personnel have with all mayors and city administrators and county officials. And he's been pretty consistent in that he is leaving as much decision-making to local jurisdictions as possible right now. And his justification for that is the diversity of the state and what's pertinent or relevant in Kansas City and St. Louis isn't for some small county that's on the Iowa border, for example. So he's deferring that. But it's like everything that we say here. Each and everything we say is contingent upon what we know today. So he's reserving that right to change, and I think what we're suggesting as well is we may very well have to change as well. Rachel?
So under section 302, that kind of second to last paragraph, all essential businesses and operations are encouraged to remain open to the greatest extent feasible. Essential businesses and operations shall comply with social distancing requirements. Now, does that have anything to do with since the 6 feet of distance? Because, right, it's at the back social distancing requirements means maintaining at least 6 foot social distancing from other individuals, washing hands with soap, all of that. Is some allowance, does that have anything to do with like occupancy limits or, right? Because again, thinking of the Walmart being crowded with people, I mean, it's a big store, so maybe there is enough room in there for 6 feet of distance, but I was just curious what that.
I think you asked a couple of things. I don't think the occupancy requirement pertains to the essential businesses. I believe the social distancing does.
I'm sorry.
I said, I believe the occupancy limits do not apply to those essential businesses, but I believe the social distancing does.
Correct.
I'm sorry, I was turning the other way. Did you hear that?
Oh, no, I heard that. I was just wondering just because if the social distancing requirements under U on page 6.9, right, if that says include maintaining at least 6 foot social distancing from other individuals, right? So if that's a part of those distancing requirements, is that something that we should be thinking about?
Say that again.
Okay, let me say it another way, right? Because if trying to think of a good example of this kind of business that might remain open, right? Like if you went into Taco and Burrito Express, right? Very small kind of room. How many people you put in there? If you put too many in, you can't keep a 6 foot distance, right? Now Walmart is a very large place, so you can probably fit a lot of people in.
Our understanding is that the social distancing is part of it.
Okay.
Saturday I was someplace and the local business community had these really nice signs printed up on every business door. So before you went in there, you knew the rules, you knew the social distancing, and it was said that the owner would be asking you to leave if you weren't going to comply with that. So one of the things that we would hope to do after tonight is work with the business community, and everything's going to go up a notch as a result.
In response to her question, there were some places in the state of Missouri and nationwide who were trying to, if you could calculate out the square feet and the number of people that could fit in and 6 feet away, they were trying to do that. Now, again, practically speaking, what happened was they ended up limiting, let's use, just to throw out a number, no more than 200 people could go into a store at one time.
Yeah.
They had 200 people standing in line right next to each other right outside the store in daylight. They realized that didn't. They were completing one task but creating another problem from it. So, I think about the only way that you can really achieve that is tell people to try to stay 6 feet of people, 6 feet away from each person.
Okay.
If you get down to the nitty gritty nuts and bolts of it, it gets ugly.
Yeah, no. I understand the difficulties. I mean, in part, I'm asking this because, I'm seeing these kinds of posts online.
Yes.
Well, they're not, look how many people there are at Walmart, so what does it matter, right?
That's the problem, and that's where some of these ordinances are more symbolic than they are substantive. Matthew?
I guess I just have a question as to whose responsibility is it? Is it the business owners or the individuals? Because you want to place all the blame on Walmart or some other business for having a parking lot full of people, but those people have a responsibility too to maintain social distancing. And so if you go to Walmart and see the parking lot full, maybe don't go to Walmart at that time.
Look, the primary driver goes back to the do the five. The primary driver is we as individuals need to have the discipline and the personal responsibility to do those things. I mean, we can put all the laws in the world, and at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily mean certain people are going to follow them. Monty or Christine, I didn't forget about you.
Or Ann.
Any questions?
I've got one, and it really does deal with when this would start. I'm assuming you're planning on doing the second reading next Monday?
No, that was not the assumption.
Okay.
The assumption was to have it ready to go, and when necessary, that's an elusive target right now, but I would tell you integral with that would be the feedback and the consensus that we're going to get from Phelps Health, the county health director, and the county commissioners. At the end of the day, yes, we could take action. We could put this in place tomorrow, but its effectiveness is going to be seriously compromised if we don't all act in concert. At least that's the thought behind it.
Okay, so open-ended on the start date, would that also maybe push back the end date because maybe the start date's not till April 21st? And
I don't
we've gotta-
think there's anything magic about the end date. I think, quite frankly, picking a number out of the sky right now is kind of useless. I mean, I don't know that 1 week
Yeah.
or 2 week or 90 days is anything significant. I don't think anybody has that expertise. So I think if we start with a shorter duration, we'll be reviewing it and probably extending it. If we go too far, like a year, we could be rescinding it early. So I think for all of us, that the conditions warrant the action.
And final thought, it's something to think about. Today, St. James not only closed their playground equipment, they also closed their tennis and basketball courts. So maybe something to think about as we move forward.
Well, and that was my question, was could we go have a, just take a piece of it and say we're closing the playgrounds and so on? Because as I believe it was Ashley said from the health department a couple weeks ago, that, if other communities around us close their parks and ours are open, then more people are going to be coming.
Yeah, Christine, there's a difference between
You
parks
can
and
get outside and play at
playgrounds.
the playground in Rolla.
Yeah, Christine, there's a difference between parks and playgrounds. So nobody's advocating closing the parks. The question is the playground equipment.
That's what I meant,
Yeah,
the
that's what I
playground.
thought, okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting that in a conversation today and talking to the county health director, one of the things, so some of you should be wondering or asking, well, what are these trigger events that are going to enact this? One of them is what happens around us. So the example that she gave us is right now the incidents around Phelps County are rather limited. But at some point, if that changes, then Phelps County and the city of Rolla would probably take defensive action. The example is, let's say, a hairdresser. Somebody in another county says, oh, I can go here to get my hair done or something like that. So you want to prevent people from coming into the area in that particular example. David, body language, just
I
saying
can
you
stay
want
here,
to
or
talk.
if you, for being able to be seen better, or those guys hear me. I don't have my phone on, so would it coming up there be better?
It's up to you.
We're late. When you know an avalanche is coming down the mountain, do you wait until it is on top of you to act? We're late. When a tornado is barreling toward your town, or floodwaters are rising, or a forest fire is headed your way, do you wait until you see the disaster at your doorstep until you move? Of course not. You act as soon as you know what is coming your way. We have known for weeks, if not months, what the rest of the world has already experienced. And what we have learned is that anything that can be done as early on as possible to reduce exposure and contact between people will help flatten the curve to keep our medical staff from being overwhelmed. Why is this important? As we see the virus spreading, we see the death toll in its wake. The effect on families is devastating. But there is another huge toll. First responders, police, fire, EMS, as well as medical staff at hospitals and clinics are being put in harm's way by our actions or inaction. Each day that we deny the need to act, we are setting those dedicated medical professionals up for disaster. There aren't enough tests. Masks and other equipment are in short supply, and there is a limit to the number of ICU beds and ventilators in our community, just like everywhere else. Our local hospital is a regional hospital and will have an influx of patients, not just from Phelps County, but from many of the other surrounding counties that use our services. At the same time, a recent Post-Dispatch article reports highlighting the fact that 15 hospitals have closed in Missouri since 2014. A third of them are in southeastern counties. A recent New York Times article highlights the effects on first responders. Quote, I'm terrified, says Mr. Suarez, who has been a paramedic in New York City for 26 years, assisted in the rescue efforts during September 11th terror attacks, and later served in the Iraq War. Quote, I honestly don't know if I'm going to survive. I'm terrified of what I've already possibly brought home. It does, quote, it does not matter where you are. It doesn't matter how much money you have. The virus is treating everyone equally, the Brooklyn paramedic said. Those on the front lines in our community will be the ones dealing with the repercussions of actions or lack thereof today. We in the United States, and particularly in rural America, have had a huge heads up as we see what has been happening around the world as coronavirus spreads. This gives us the luxury of being able to make plans in advance to mitigate the worst impacts of the virus. We don't need to wait until we have the first positive test in our county to know we have a problem on our hands. As Phelps Health Director Ed Clayton recently said, quote, "We also know clearly why we are not seeing any positive tests for the virus in our community." Clayton said he thinks the numbers being reported in Missouri are artificially low because at this point, testing in the state of Missouri is very limited. I'm going to tell you, it is in Phelps County. It is in Rolla, and it is much more widespread than confirmed cases suggest, said Phelps Health CEO Ed Clayton. The reason for that is there is a finite, quote, "There is a finite number of testing kits that are available in the state. The kits and supplies have been going to other states that saw the effects earlier, such as New York, Washington, and California," he said, limiting the number of kits that are available in states in the heartland like Missouri. The Missouri Medical Association also spoke out in a letter to Governor Parson a week ago. Quote, "We now believe that a statewide shelter-in-place order is the only way to curb the exceptional spread of COVID-19. If things progress as is, COVID-19 patients will deplete the state's available hospital beds, ventilators, and precious personal protective equipment. Any additional time without a shelter-in-place, stay-at-home requirement wastes crucial healthcare resources, including manpower." While Missouri's governor has not acted, our state Senator Justin Brown recently wrote in his weekly Focus column, "The rest of the world watched in wonder as Chinese officials ordered nearly all normal human interaction in affected areas to cease. Residents were told to isolate themselves in their homes to avoid spreading the infection." He continues, quote, "The rate of infection in China slowed dramatically. Their temporary hospitals are closing for lack of patients. In Europe, officials initially responded less decisively to the contagion, and the virus spread like wildfire, quickly overcoming medical resources there," end quote. Senator Brown makes clear the choice we have right now. Isolate ourselves in our homes, or act less decisively and watch the virus spread like wildfire as it overwhelms medical resources in our community. China is not the only place we can see the results. A recent New York Times article reports, with so many states now deep in crisis, the signs of provisional success in the Seattle area offer a lesson for other cities and regions that are just beginning to see the onset of the coronavirus. Early and aggressive action to contain the spread may help lower the trajectory of the virus that could otherwise overwhelm health systems. Sadly, another Post-Dispatch article headline shows us where we stand. Quote, "This week, Missouri saw a 600% jump in coronavirus cases." That was last week. The largest increase in the country. The spread of the virus in Missouri this past week stands out, even compared to neighbors. In Illinois, where the state is under lockdown, the number of confirmed cases grew by 237% in the same period. The science is clear. We will continue to stall and fail our community and those that put their lives on their line to save our citizens every day. Will we continue to stall and fail, or will we step up and show leadership in our community? Many naysayers have said that a stay-at-home order has no teeth and is almost impossible to enforce. But those people are missing the point. The most important thing we can do is to make the statement, "Stay at home," because it demonstrates to the community that we recommend that measure to keep people safe. While there are always those that will break the law, even when they know police may or may not catch them in the act, the overwhelming majority of citizens are law-abiding and wish to do the right thing. They just have not been given more decisive direction from leadership. Others say that so many essential businesses are exempt that ultimately it will have no effect. I disagree. Once again, we are making a statement of leadership and asking that citizens recognize the impacts and consequences they could have on the lives of others by their actions. We as a city are getting serious, and they need to also. As an example of leadership, I would like to give special thanks and recognition to Chancellor Mo Dagani of MS&T. He had to make the difficult decision to cancel the premier event of the year for Rolla students, business, and community, the St. Pat's celebration in Rolla. He apparently received much negativity and hostility from students, community members, and partygoers for having done so. This was not an easy decision by any means. The stakes were high, and he knew there would be a backlash. But he did so because he saw the threat of bringing this many people in the same place at the same time as the coronavirus had begun to spread throughout the U.S. A recent MSN article discusses how Mardi Gras may have been the perfect breeding ground for the coronavirus, leading New Orleans to become one of the epicenters of the virus. New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell appeared on CNN Thursday afternoon saying if she had more information from the federal government, she would have pulled the plug on the carnival season. When it's not taken seriously at a federal level, it's very difficult to transcend to the local level in making these decisions, Cantrell said. In hindsight, if we were given proper direction, we would not have Mardi Gras, and I would have been the leader to cancel it. We now think, in large part, Mardi Gras happened when the virus was circulating and 1.4 million people came to our city. Many came from all over Louisiana to New Orleans. They caught beads, but also caught COVID-19, end quote, G said. Does anyone see the similarities to Rolla's St. Pat's celebration here? Sometimes the right decision is not the easiest one. Many of us on council have been asking that we meet immediately and take decisive action for over a week and a half now. But the message of urgency has fallen on deaf ears. We're late, it's true, but better late than never.
Thank you, David. A lot of good perspective there. No disrespect to Senator Brown.
Actually, he was
I don't
very
believe it.
supportive of Senator Brown.
I don't
I don't know
believe
if
a
you heard
damn
the quote.
thing that the Chinese government would tell me, but that's his choice to do that.
He's the one who
I take
made
a
those
little
comments.
exception to your last comment regarding the responsiveness at City Hall. The fact of the matter is, yes, some of you did want to call a special meeting, but that was not the majority of you. That's number one. Number two, we didn't feel it was appropriate to call a meeting just for the sake of calling a meeting. You don't need to smile at me. We didn't want to have a meeting until we were prepared to have a meeting, and that took some work to get to the point of having this meeting. So I do take exception to that. The rest of your points, the earlier points, it's a good perspective, and I give you credit for that. And I don't want to forget that you're on the line, at least audio. Do you have any comments or questions?
Yes, I'm here. David was well said. My son's been harping at me from St. Louis too. He's working with that with city leaders regarding the social distancing and so on. And he is staying home. He has a little office set up at his place, and he's not going downtown to work. I read what Mr. Clayton said, and I agree with you thoroughly on New Orleans and potentially spring break too. We might be seeing the ripple effect of that right now. I do believe that the city has gone well above and beyond in terms of our organization and our attempt, but I think it is time to probably take that next step, if not today, very soon.
Thank you.
And holding the line on the social interaction.
Jody?
What is the Phelps Health saying at this point as of today? What's their
As of
position?
today, as of last week, and as of 11 o'clock this morning, she is supportive of the fact of not taking this action tonight.
Did you mean Phelps Health, the health department?
Phelps Health, the hospital.
Oh, I'm sorry. They're the same.
Okay.
That's the first question we ask every week.
So I guess
I was wondering about, should our direction be to our public health department, to impress on them that maybe, that they should take this next step. I don't know. I mean, if we did it, it would be for Rolla, Missouri, and 5 miles into the county. If health department puts it on, it's for the entire county. Is that right?
The answer to that is yes, but I think once the consensus of that group gets to the point of recommending the change, I think that each of us will go back to our respective bodies. The county health director and the hospital will go to the county, and we will come to you with that recommendation. So the key is everybody really needs to take the action at the same time for maximum effectiveness, whenever that is. And I think in going back to your question, Jody, I think all parties know that we're going to get to a certain point. It's just a matter of when. When is the appropriate time to pull that trigger, as John says?
Okay.
You do it too early, you know, you can lose effectiveness, and then you're back here and said, okay, what do you want to do? Throw people in jail? They're walking the street? You know.
So I guess I'm going to have to agree with Dave for the most part on this one. I have an 87-year-old mother who's in lockdown in Indiana. She's got diabetes and high blood pressure. A 24-year-old son is in lockdown in Los Angeles. And I'm scared. I'm scared for them. I'm scared for everybody here. I'm scared for my community. I've been kind of obsessively watching and reading, and I think that everything that I have seen, including whatever her name is, Dr. Brixa or Brixen, who said today, if you wait until it's evident, you've waited too late.
That's right.
And I don't want to be too late. I don't want to be too late. I don't want anybody in my community to be so sick that they feel like they're drowning. I don't want anyone in my family or in my community to have to go to the hospital not knowing if they'll ever be able to see or touch their loved ones again. Scares the crap out of me. I don't want anybody to have a funeral where they have to sit in their blinking car instead of being with their loved ones. And so I can't do a whole lot to help people when they're sick or if they're in economic need. What I can do, and what's part of my responsibility as a city council person, is to take action that will help my community deal with what we're having to deal with. I think it's time that we take this step. If the governor won't take it, if the president won't take it, if it's up to us as a local community and as a local civic government, then I think we need to bite the bullet and do it. I understand that it's going to be economically difficult for some people. I want to go out shopping. I want to go do stuff. But for the good of all of our community, I think it's important for us to send this message that people need to stay home. The virus moves when we move. If we don't move, it doesn't move. And if I don't move, then that's just one less person to be a vector. If you don't move, that's another person that's not going to be a vector. If we have the Walmart parking lot half full instead of full, then we've helped our community to level that playing field for our health professionals who are going to start getting sick and not being able to help us. So those people, the people at the hospital, the people who are first responders, the people who have no choice but to be exposed to this and who might take it home to their families, I don't want to be a part of not giving them as much protection as we can give them. And so that's why I think that it's time. We're either late or we're on the bubble, but we're not too early. We need to do it now.
Thank you, Jody. That was a well thought out and emotional response, and I didn't want to interrupt you. But however, someone's banging, so I don't know if it's somebody that's calling in, but perhaps you can mute your phone because it's what? Somebody on the iPhone. Whoever's calling in on an iPhone, please hang up or respect the impact that you're having on the others. So thank you for that, Jody. The decision is yours. I'll come to you in a second. Our responsibility as city administration is to give you options, is to give you a path to take one decision or another. And it's our job to give you the causes and effect and explain the nuances of this or any other ordinances. That's our job. But we are not the decision makers. You are the policy makers, and that's a decision that you certainly could make tonight, or you can make it at a later date. So again, don't misunderstand when our recommendation is counter to that, or I hear certain things and I say it's counter to what you believe. We're just trying to present all the different avenues, because this is a tough decision. John?
I like the first reading idea. I do gather, I think none of us are medical professionals, and I know the emotional part of it, I agree, but I also think we need to trust the county health, or this is what I believe. I trust the health department, and I trust Phelps Health, and I'm willing to follow their recommendation. But I do think a first reading is appropriate, so.
To those remote, Christine, Monty, or Ann, any comments?
I do have a
ahead,
comment
Christine.
or two. I totally agree with Jody. Part of the reason why I'm calling in remotely is because, she's terrified for her family members. I am the same. All my family members, though, are in states where they have stay-at-home orders statewide. I do have health issues that make me more susceptible than, the average Joe in the public. Is people, because we don't have a stay-at-home order, they're not taken seriously. They're thinking, vacation, really can't go anyplace, so I might as well go to Walmart, or I'm going to take my kids to the park and play on the equipment. Life has changed. Life has changed tremendously. And I think we do need to look at, responses in Italy and even the responses in China, and how quickly we need to act. And I think if we wait, because I do agree with some of what Dave said too, it's here in the community. It may be mild cases, it may be mistaken for, oh, I just feel crappy. But I heartily believe it's here in the community. And if we wait until we're not testing enough, if we wait until we get that one positive test, I think we've waited too long, because then that person or people with that person have then had the opportunity to unknowingly affect others. And I think the people that scare me the most are those asymptomatic people, which is why I have to stay home and not go out in public. And if I have to be out in public, I have gloves, I have a mask, and I know people look at me like I'm weird, but I have to protect myself. And, like Jody, I don't want to be the cause of somebody in our community catching it, because people aren't taking it seriously.
Thank you. Ann?
I do know that St. Louis University, director of the hospital there, and Washington University appealed to the governor to sign an order. And he has not at this point.
Monty?
I would agree with what John said a while ago. We probably should do this first reading tonight. So if something does happen within the next 2 or 3 days, we can jump on it quicker. A week from now, we may be in the same position we are now, which is much better than most communities that started their stay-at-home orders, and that we don't have a known case here in the city. I think they're out there somewhere. Some people probably already had it. I talked to my barber today. He said, I had it. I think I did. I was not tested. They would not test me. But I am 100% positive I had the virus. He stayed home. Thank God he didn't get so sick he had to be hospitalized. But I think we should go ahead and do that first reading tonight. The question I have maybe is for John, but we have that list of non-essential businesses that we can notify quickly that you need to close your doors.
Well, that's one of the tough things about this is almost no one is doing a licensing of the essential businesses. There are a few states who have done that, or a few counties have done that. Most aren't, and it's almost self-determined until the government says you determined inappropriately or incorrectly. So we would certainly, if council takes the action, we will send the notice we can out to businesses. But there's no system in place that's going to be issuing a license for this essential business determination. Chief Smith reported tonight that there's people responding on Facebook and social media asking about Paul's Furniture. That's a gray one. It's like Furniture Factory Outlet. I can picture in Kansas City, they left open one of their major furniture retail stores was considered essential because people are equipping their homes and their offices accordingly, and they took criticism for it, but they deemed that one to be essential. So, I don't know how we're going to make those determinations. Council can be very, very explicit in the ordinance and spell it out even further. So that's going to be one of the real challenges.
Yeah, because I was thinking, even if we would pass something tonight, completely approve the ordinance as it is now tonight, you've got to give those non-essential businesses 2 or 3 days to get their affairs in order, maybe cancel appointments, whatever they've got to do before an order goes into effect. Greene County went with a stay-at-home order last week, and it doesn't go into effect till Thursday. So we have to, give them time to be able to get everything situated so they can close their doors.
Yeah, most of the ordinances had several days notice for that.
Yeah, so, if we did it today, it would be April 6th. If we wait to April 6th to do the final reading or something, or quicker because something has popped up, 7 days out before it even takes effect then.
So for those that are here, I want to give each one of you a chance to either ask a question or make a statement as we wind this down. Marie.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to lend my support to the idea of taking action tonight and decisively. Both the hospital and the health department have indicated that they believe that there's already spread in the community. Here, let me unmute my Zoom on my phone and see if that helps.
I think it's better on the phone, isn't it?
How's that, Ann?
Use the echo. It's better if you use the phone.
Okay.
So push your mic out of the way.
All right, mic out of the way. That's not better, is it?
That's much better.
That's better for Ann, but not for us.
Come up front, maybe.
Okay. So felt in the newspaper, Ashley Juan, in her press releases on the internet, they both indicate that they believe that there are spread cases in the community, but they just can't prove it yet. So if our trigger point is a confirmed case, to me that seems just completely irresponsible. People are making decisions based on the action that we're taking. Businesses are making decisions. Individuals are making decisions. Schools are making decisions. Someone has to be the one to make the decision, and nobody wants to make it. Of course we don't want to make this decision. But I agree. I have not seen any evidence in anything that I'm reading, anything that I'm researching, of anyone saying, I wish we had not taken action as soon as we did. Everything that we read says, I wish we had gotten out in front of it. Politicians and businessmen and the decisions that they make have their place. But medical professionals, health professionals, are recommending that we take swifter, stricter action sooner. And I would like to see those recommendations be the ones that drive our actions here. As to whether or not this action is symbolic or substantive, it's my understanding that this spreads exponentially, and that by reducing the spread at all, any person that's carrying this around our community that stays home because we have asked them to do so, any spread that's reduced because businesses have less people in them is going to have an exponential benefit. Are you going to get 100% compliance? Absolutely not. We're never going to get 100% compliance. If our goal is all or perfect, we're going to fail. Obviously, that's true. but I don't think that means that we shouldn't try. I would be in favor of a first and second reading tonight and taking the action sooner rather than later, because our citizens are begging us. There's petitions going
around our community. They're talking about it all over social media. If you watch
the
the
governor's
governor's briefings,
every other comment
is
please,
for the
for the
love of God, do something.
Make an action, make a recommendation to protect the citizens of this state. And we don't have the influence over the governor, but we do have the influence in this community to say we will take action that is in your best interest, and we will do it now. So that would be my position.
Thank you. Carolyn?
I actually agree quite a bit with Marie. I think we need to get it in place so that at a moment's notice, you can say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do it now. You have so many days to comply. So I think having the first and second reading is a very good idea tonight.
First and second readings means we enact it.
Right.
Okay. So that's what you're in favor of?
Yes, yes.
Okay. John?
I've already spoken.
Jody?
I'm going to ditto Marie and just say I do feel that Monty's correct that if we do enact tonight, that we would need to put a date where we give a few days for folks to get used to the idea and get the affairs in order so that they can do it in a sort of a measured way and not in a panic.
We're also going to need a few days, I believe, to work through the enforcement. At least what kind of guidelines to give the police department. David?
One other quick thing. I know we mentioned about acting all in concert. To be honest, unless every state through the federal government is acting in concert, we're always, even if the state of Missouri acts, somebody can drive from Iowa or whatever. So the point is, until any of those things happen, we can't just wait. I think that we do need to look after our community and protect our community the best we can. And yes, there's a lot of exceptions. There are many things that are still open and essential, but we can send an important message that this is very important and a symbolic statement. Clearly, that's the most impactful part of what we're doing, is letting people know we feel this is something you need to do. And I do agree that we can still start with this. It's kind of loose in some way, like John has mentioned about a lot of businesses are still open, but we can eventually amend to tighten it if we see that, whoa, we're having a big trouble here. It's affecting our medical personnel and our first responders, and we can't handle it anymore. We can tighten it after that, but I think where it sits now is a good start to already send the message.
Whatever we do, we should be preaching day in and day out those CDC recommendations, because at the end of the day, those are what's really effective, more so than these ordinances. So we got to keep that in front of everybody. Jacob?
To me, it becomes a matter of looking back on this in the future. Would I rather be wrong and be alarmist, or be wrong because I didn't do enough? And so to me, this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that it's inevitable where we're at, I think. So I think, for an example, I work for the state government, and we were told Sunday night that Monday night they're locking the doors and nobody's coming in. So things are happening on short notice, but that's the nature of this situation. So I think something like having something like Wednesday morning be the start of this, to me, that I don't think we could do any better than that.
Thank you. Matthew?
So tonight, we declared a state of emergency. We gave you, Mayor, a lot of authority to take action on a very short notice if need be. I think that was an appropriate action for us to take. I think we've also heard from our first responders in healthcare community, in our community, and they've indicated to us that we shouldn't take this step at this time, that this is going too far at this time. I don't know, in other areas of the country, they've taken other actions. But as John said, I trust my health care. I trust Phelps Health. I trust our director, our local director of our health department. And they've indicated that they think that at this time that we should not move forward with this stay-at-home order. That's not to say that we shouldn't be doing all the things we're talking about, following the CDC recommendations, staying at home, sheltering at home. But I'm going to defer to our local healthcare and our local healthcare director and our Phelps Health. And I think we should do the first reading of this, and the mayor can call us into session, or we can come into session on a very short notice if we have to take further action.
Thank you. Rachel?
All right. So, like everyone else, I've been sort of thinking about this really hard, knowing that we were going to be contemplating this. And, you know, working at Missouri S&T, where they have been extremely proactive, right? Like Jacob mentioned that the state where he works has shut the buildings. S&T's had those buildings closed for, since about spring break, honestly. So it's been a while that they've been working really hard to tighten this down and to protect, right? Because it's an area that gathers a lot of people together, right? And I've been asking my friends who are biologists, right? You know, people who actually work on infectious disease and on viruses and stuff, and been really kind of trying to seek out their advice. What would you tell Rolla to do if you had the power? Right? And I think some of the things that have kind of been pointed out already, so I won't hit this too hard, right, is that, you know, carriers, people who are infectious and don't know it, are the biggest danger. They're also in that kind of population, you know, that are going out because they don't feel sick, right? That, you know, while it's great that a lot of our local businesses are working really hard to sanitize, to encourage people to take the measures and follow CDC guidelines, and that is, as you say, the most important thing to do, right? The kinds of concerns that we have here in Rolla might look different from those in the rest of Phelps County, right? We are the largest population area, so we're going to have the most social contact. So at this point in time, I think it's right for us to maybe, as Jacob says, be more proactive than reactive, right? Because it is exponential. What are we going to say before the first case, before the overload, or what happens to us? What do we say if this healthcare system, as none of us want, gets overloaded around here? So I would also support a first and final reading tonight.
Thank you. Tough subject, good discussion. There's a lot of aspects to look at this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a discussion that we certainly needed to have. So if there's nothing else, Lance, would you give us the first reading?
An ordinance declaring, sorry, I think I was at the wrong one. No, I was right. An ordinance declaring an emergency proclamation in the city of Rolla, Missouri, and executing a stay-at-home ordinance.
Motion to suspend the rules and have the second reading with a timing in place? Is that what you're going to discuss, Judy?
Yeah, that we would need to put a date.
Wednesday.
You need to have a motion.
There's
and a second first.
two steps.
Okay.
So the
Motion to suspend the rules and have the second reading.
Second.
Let's do a roll call vote on that, Millie.
Roder,
Yes.
Proud,
No.
Murphy,
And you're muted.
Murphy.
I'm sorry, yes.
Schott,
Yes.
Schneider,
Yes.
Bruder,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
Jordan,
Yes.
Everly,
Yes.
Boland,
Yes.
Muse.
No.
The motion to suspend the rules has passed. Before we have the second reading, is there a motion to modify it with an implementation date?
I make a motion to modify it to this coming Wednesday morning at 9 a.m.
Can we do that? I mean, can we do it with respect to City Hall? Can we do it with respect to enforcement? And can we notify those businesses? And let's say we can, could they wind down in essentially 24 hours, because that's
Could
what
I,
we're giving them.
could I offer that maybe we should have the starting point at the close of business one at a day, so that
Right.
when you close your business at whatever day it is, that's the last time instead of in the
You
morning?
know, it's pretty easy, David,
Hold
for
on.
you to make that.
Hold on, we need to be clear. There's a motion on the table. Before you get to discussion, there needs to be a second. If there's no second, motion dies for lack of a second.
So what's the motion?
Then there can be a second motion,
So
but
let's-
first there needs to be a second to get into discussion.
So do you want to revise?
I'd like to revise that, yes, to close of business Wednesday, defined as close of business, 5 PM or whatever we decide is close of business.
Okay, is there a second to that?
Is there an alternative motion?
Yeah, is there an alternative?
Well,
I mean, you
I'll
have
make
to
a
have an
motion.
effective date on this, unless you want to
Yeah.
make it right now.
I'll make a motion that we have the date at 8 a.m. on April 6th. That gives everybody a week to wind things down, gives the staff a week to figure out the implementation, and get everybody notified.
Is there a second to that? Carol is a second. Roll call vote.
Quick question before the roll call vote happens.
I'm going to give it to discussion, but
I just want to know how it's going to work. Like, if I vote no on this because I'm concerned about the date, how does that work? Do we have another?
we're still going to have the second reading.
You'll still have a second reading. You
Ah.
can't,
Need another motion.
Okay,
You-
we're amending this, excuse me, sorry.
So let's have the discussion before the roll call vote. So hold your thought, John. To John, from administrative and enforcement, notifying business people, giving them a quick but reasonable time to wind down.
Yeah, it's interesting, because no doubt the state of Missouri has, the governor is able to make that declaration. You're talking about employees, but you're not talking about inventory. To me, that seems like a short term, a day or two. I just don't know how we're going to get that effectively out and message that. I would definitely encourage longer. Now, I don't, whether that's the 6th or it's Friday, I don't think 2 days is enough, but I would do 8 a.m. on some date, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days out in the future, so we can get some notification out there. Because we're going to have 50 businesses asking, how do we fall under this? And quite frankly, I don't know that administratively we've got an answer for that. So we're going to have to run some of that back by council and say, well, what do you think? And we'll do those through consensus, but we're going to need a few more days to do
Let's
that.
rewind what you just said. Are you saying that council's going to decide whether a specific business is essential in this ordinance or
No,
not?
but based on this ordinance, we're going to have some input. I mean, if I'm going to say, well, yeah, Paul's and Furniture Factory is an essential business, and council disagrees with that and said that was absurd, well, a little more direction would help. So we may need to be able to shoot some notes and say, give us some feedback
Isn't
on
that
some
an
of these kinds of
executive
things.
function to?
I think you're asking for a mess, quite
Yeah,
frankly.
I think that's an
If
executive
you expect to
function.
go back to a governing body, hey, does Joe's apply, does Mary's apply?
I'm not saying for
They
decision,
need
but
to set,
input. but-
they need to set the policy, I
Right.
think.
Yeah, I agree.
Set the guidelines and the policy, and we need to implement. Now, if we screw up, okay, they can step in, but I don't think it's practical to go back with every business. That's just my own opinion.
Well, what I'm saying is we're going to struggle making administratively, based on this ordinance, some of those determinations. So all
We
the
have to
more reason
start.
that we need a few more
Council has
days than
spoken,
less.
They want to start. We'll have to start.
Right.
And
Right. But more days is better
So we'll
than
stub
less.
our toe and we'll get some rights in between, right ones in between. John?
No, my point was made. Thank you.
Okay.
So where are we?
So
Voting on the date, I think.
So-
there was a motion and a
There's a motion
second
and
for
second.
it
Roll
to be
call vote.
implemented on April 6th at
8 AM.
8 a.m.
Is there discussion before that vote? Just,
Well, that's what this was, but if.
okay. I would just personally say that I think that this, earlier the better. If my ask for an amendment to be on Wednesday was not enough time, I think by the end of the week to me, seem crazy. So I personally think that we should turn down this amendment and go for like at least the end of the week as the latest possible, personally. So I think we should vote no on this amendment and then re-amend.
Okay, so there's a motion, there's a second to amend the ordinance to go in effect at 8 AM on April 6th. Millie?
Jordan,
Yes,
Bolin,
Yes.
Reuter,
Yes.
Schneider,
Yes.
Allen,
No.
Murphy, and Murphy,
And unmute.
I'm sorry, yes, please.
Crowell,
Yes.
Muse,
Yes.
Roder,
No.
Everly,
No.
Schott.
No.
7 ayes, and 4 nays.
So the amendment is approved. Second reading, please, the amended ordinance.
May I ask a sort of a question here or point of order? Because one thing that John just said is that if he feels that this ordinance itself is not specific enough, that there would be, should we be talking about further amendments that would clarify more of this? Or is that something more that?
We could get
that's
to that
something
point,
we'll-
Rachel, but I think to try and do it now would be difficult.
Okay.
I don't want to speak for the commission, but I think this is going to perhaps result in them making decisions, and I don't know if they're going to make the same decision as us. I don't know if their action would be written the same as us.
Yeah.
So I think we just need some days here to start and work through it.
Okay.
Second reading
And-
of the amended ordinance.
An ordinance declaring an emergency proclamation in the city of Rolla, Missouri, and executing a stay-at-home ordinance.
Is there a motion to approve?
Make a motion. Second.
Motion made and second, roll call vote.
Allen,
Yes.
Murphy,
And unmute.
Yes.
Bolin,
Yes.
Schneider,
Yes.
Ruder,
Yes.
Muse,
Yes.
Roder,
Yes.
Everly,
Yes.
Crowell,
No.
Schott.
Yes.
Jordan.
Yes.
Ordinance is approved. Good discussion, thank you, this was a tough decision. There's a lot of complexity and emotion on this issue, so it was hopefully the hardest one we've ever had to tackle. I think, Christine, you have, I believe, a statement from a group that's petitioning. I understand you want to read it?
Yes, I have to unmute.
Okay.
This says, to whom it may concern, rather than react, let's be proactive and prevent the spread of COVID-19 while Rolla still has time. Rural U.S. areas are expected to have a spike in COVID-19 cases by mid-April. Missouri in general is already experiencing public health crisis. COVID-19 affects and will continue to affect our poor and working class community members the most, only exacerbating the state of emergency they already endure every day. Food insecurity, homelessness, and health crisis existed long before COVID-19, and we must take action now as well as in the future to protect our communities. Rolla is home to some 20,000 people and counting, with 1,669 people per square mile. 31% of Rolla residents are living below the poverty line, including children, which is about 6,200 total people. And 24% of Rolla's residents are 50 plus years old, which is about 4,800 people. About 1,400 Rolla residents are veterans, and we know that COVID-19 affects those with underlying conditions like many veterans have. 58% of Rolla residents are renters, which comes out to about 11,600 people, and approximately 13% of properties in Rolla are vacant, which is around 1,165 empty homes. These numbers represent many things, but most importantly, they show us that people who will be permanently affected in our community if we do nothing. Phelps Health has confirmed that COVID-19 is in Phelps County and in Rolla. We cannot afford to continue without intervention. With some precautions taken, it is still estimated that 2% of the population could die due to COVID-19. If only 2% of the Rolla population dies during this pandemic, that is 400 people, and that doesn't take into account their loved ones who will also be permanently affected by their preventable deaths. Which 400 people is Rolla's leadership willing to sacrifice here in favor of business as usual? Name them. Otherwise, we must take swift and serious action to protect the people of Rolla, all of them, to the best of our abilities. People who are housing insecure are currently homeless or at a higher risk of being exposed to the virus, becoming ill, and suffering catastrophic health outcomes. Low-income tenants are also at risk if they get ill or cannot work because they're monitoring symptoms, at risk, watching kids, etc., and therefore can't make their rent. Relying on goodwill of property owners is not proper policy. We need local, state, and federal action to protect the people. We, the people of Rolla, call on Mayor Lou Magnets to demand action be taken by the state government via Governor Parson to protect all the people of Missouri. We can and must stand united to ensure the well-being of our whole community through this crisis. Rewriting the rules to protect our most vulnerable will build a healthier and stronger Missouri for generations to come. Given the CARES Act, put a moratorium on mortgages and provide aid to property and business owners, it is only just the same privileges be extended to others. Much of the work put into finding a solution has been done by the KC Tenant Organization. These demands have been created by people directly impacted by housing issues and people experiencing homelessness, as KC Tenants believes the people closest to the problems are closest to the solutions. Rolla for Bernie 2020 recognizes that this public health crisis will affect everyone in Missouri, not just certain cities or counties. We stand in solidarity with tenants across the state and call on Mayor Lou Magnets to institute a rent mortgage suspension or rent mortgage freeze and fund rental assistance, enact an immediate comprehensive statewide eviction foreclosure moratorium, ban utility shutoffs and mandate universal services including internet, provide homes and expanded services for people experiencing homelessness. At the local level, we call on Mayor Lou Magnets acknowledge the severity of COVID-19 coronavirus to the public by declaring a state of emergency. Not only is this a health and housing crisis, but it is also one of hate too. We call on Mayor Lou to officially address the virus as COVID-19 or coronavirus and let it be known that this virus knows no race, nationality, or ethnicity. We call on Mayor Lou Magnets to make it clear that anti-Asian racism will not be tolerated in our community. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders deserve dignity and respect. Immigrants make Rolla great, and hate towards them is equally unacceptable. Rolla is one community, and we need that human solidarity now. We call on Mayor Lou Magnets to use the legal powers, which he has already confirmed he has, to halt rent late fees, as well as evictions, and put a ban on all utility shutoffs for the duration of this crisis and throughout the entire recovery period. For the safety of those who represent Rolla, we call on Mayor Lou Magnets to begin immediate virtual meetings, allowing the public to have input. We call on Mayor Lou Magnets to put in place an emergency stay-at-home order and instruct the public to practice social distancing, even those without symptoms. Many people are carriers of COVID-19, but asymptomatic. However, that means they can spread the virus wherever they go. To keep yourself and the community safe, do not gather in groups inside or outside. Going for walks are fine, but stay 6 feet away from others as much as possible. Do not go to the gym. Do not let your children have playdates, sleepovers. Regularly wash your hands with soap and water. Only go out for essentials and buy what you need at the time. Don't hoard. Self-quarantine for at least 14 days if you show symptoms of COVID-19, dry cough, fever, fatigue, body aches, chills, and go to the hospital if those symptoms escalate or call 911 in an emergency. Protective measures also need to be taken for the safety of our town during this emergency. We call on Mayor Lou Magnets to demand state action so that our healthcare workers have the personal protective equipment, PPEs, ventilators, and other resources they will need in preparation for a rural outbreak. Community volunteers and organizations such as the Mission, Feeding Phelps Families, and others will need PPEs. The closure of parks, playgrounds, and other public spaces, as well as non-essential businesses, will be an essential step in flattening the curve so that our hospitals do not become overwhelmed like we're seeing across our country and the world at large. We also acknowledge that many big businesses and corporate chains that will be able to circumvent such non-essential closures, but we must remind ourselves that the CARES Act expands unemployment and provides aid to those self-employed and small businesses. While it is understandable that those self-employed and small business owners are scared to close for economic reasons, this is yet another reason for the state intervention in the form of additional aid and resources. We call on Mayor Lou Magnets to fight on behalf of Rolla residents, especially those most vulnerable.
Thank you for that, Christine. One of the items in here was utilities, and I know RMU has been doing a number of things. Rodney, I believe you had a board meeting today? Mute.
There we go. I'm unmuting. Yes, we had a board meeting at 4:30 today. Appreciate you letting me chat just real briefly. The major thing, or one of the many things we talked about was kind of what we've been doing and what we are doing with regard to utilities. So just a reminder, I think the council is very aware, for the last several years, we've been doing discounts on our utility bills, helping our customers. Since last October, we've made a lot of those, or many of those reductions on the electric side permanent. And again, reduced our revenues for the benefit of our customers. Since March 23rd, we discontinued non-payment service terminations. So we're doing that through May 1st at the current moment. So that's since last Monday. We've been waiving all future late fees, reconnect fees until we direct our customer service staff otherwise to do that. We are recommending that all our customers seek additional financial assistance. They need to talk to MOCA, Gray, Salvation Army, all those types of financial assistance organizations that can help them, because even though we're talking about not doing disconnects or disconnects for non-pay, we're talking about future late fees. As customers are out there in the community, they're still using energy, they're still using water, they're still using frankly, sewer, trash, all those other services, and those bills will continue to grow. So we want people to be cost conscious, make decisions today that will help them in the future, because eventually those bills do come due. But we have discontinued non-pay as of last Monday, and talking about late fees. But the biggest thing that the board took action on tonight was to augment kind of the services that are the things that we're doing already. To augment that, the board authorized transferring $50,000 from the utility funds to the RMU Helping Hand program. In case you don't know, the Helping Hand program is a program that is normally voluntary contributions that come to the utility. We put that all in a separate fund. Grace administers that fund. What that means is Grace screens anyone needing assistance with regard to utility. They tell us how much to apply out of this fund to individuals' accounts on the residential side, and we apply that money. That's over the last 14 years we've had that program going. We have, through our customers' generosity, provided about $85,000 worth of assistance to our customers. So what we're doing today, or what the board took action today, is to about triple the amount of available money right now. There's about $25,000 in our Helping Hand Fund program. The board has added $50,000 in our funds to that program to assist those that, especially in this time, that have a need, that either have a reduction in work hours, loss of a job, those kinds of things. And that's what our Helping Hand program was originally set up for. So, we think I think that's a really good thing. We're asking if there's any, and it's not for everybody, but if there's customers out listening that want another way they can help those in need in the community, we encourage them to support this Helping Hand program. It's similar to Operation Roundup that the co-ops would have, but it's our own program here locally. So for customers experience a hardship, we want them to contact us, learn their options. So we will direct them to this. We'll be working with Grace the next day or two to let them know these funds are available. I don't have the exact date, but I think we'll try and move that fairly quickly into that program. But there's available money in the Helping Hand program now, and again, that's administered through Grace. So those are the things, like I said, some of the things we have been doing and the things we're doing going forward. So happy to answer any questions from council on this project.
Carolyn?
Rodney, I had a phone call from one of the small businesses on Pine Street, and she was speaking for supposedly 3 other businesses also. And she was asking, is there anything in place that would help the small businesses to help with their electric bills as they're losing business and maybe
right. So with regard to stopping our non-pays and those kinds of things, that is for small businesses as well. We know in the latest, I think they call it the CARES bill that just came through, I think you spoke out a little bit before, it just was approved by the federal government. That has, I believe, if I've got my numbers here, I think had about $350 billion that was allocated toward helping small business, or a business, $350 billion was authorized for loan forgiveness grants to small businesses, nonprofits to help pay expenses like utilities, rent, those types of things. But I think it has a requirement that they have to maintain or at least a portion of their workforce. I do not have all the details of that, but there is some financial support coming from the federal government on that. I don't have a lot of information on that just yet. But again, for small businesses, we encourage them to call us, talk to our customer service reps, and we'll deal with everyone on a case-by-case basis and do what we can to help.
Thank you, Rodney. Please, was somebody speaking? Okay. Rodney, please express our thanks to the board and your staff for doing that.
Will do.
You know, one of the things that I noticed when I moved here a number of years ago, this is a very generous community. There are a lot of people on the government payroll in this town. I don't care if you're in education or you work for an agency, and you're still getting paychecks. And I'm working for a big company, and I'm still getting a paycheck. So I ask everyone to not only open your hearts and open your wallets. There's a lot of people that are affected by this in a very life-changing way. And as we go to shut these non-essential businesses, these are hourly workers, there are people that work for tips, let's remember them. So, unless there's something else, Marie?
Yeah, I just wanted real quick to say thank you to the city employees. I've been watching the press releases and all of the communication from City Hall as well, and I just felt like it was worth mentioning that our city staff is working extremely hard and being creative, and they deserve appreciation from the citizens and patience and grace as they are navigating their limited services. Some people have been frustrated with some of the changes, and I would just encourage citizens to show grace and patience with the city employees because they're doing a fantastic job.
Thank you very much for that. So, if that's it, you earned your paychecks tonight. Meeting adjourned.
Thanks for the burrito.
Got our work cut out for us tomorrow. Probably need to